So this is exercise 2, taking measurements in MeshLab. So visually inspecting 3D models like we did in exercise 1 is necessary for a couple different things: to familiarize yourself with the data set, to make initial judgments on the suitability of the data for your research, and to take note of your initial observations, so any patterns of similarities or differences in appearance. But to investigate questions like whether the same individual created two different pots, whether the distance between a series of fingerprints suggests that they all belong to the same hand at the same time, or whether different fingerprints were made during different stages of the manufacturing process. We need to be able to take measurements to assess the size and distance of these features more rigorously. So in this exercise, we'll show you how to carry out simple measurements from 3D models in MeshLab. So for this, we need models that are scaled. And so scaled data is necessary for anything that involves measurements. So what does scaled data mean? It means that the units used and embedded in the 3D data here relate directly to real-world units. So in this case, the data has been scaled in millimeters. So when we take measurements, those measurements will also be in millimeters. So without scale, without knowing the scale, something like a 3D model of the Colosseum and a 3D model of a soup bowl could be the same size. So it's really important for these metric analyses for it to be clear what scale they have been recorded in. So to measure between 2 points on a 3D model is pretty easy in MeshLab. So what you do is you click on this little measuring tool up here. And so then you want to decide which 2 points to measure from. And you just click on the 3D model there and there. And you can see that the measurement comes up both at your last point that you clicked, so 29 millimeters in this case, but the measurement also shows up down here as distance M0 29.686, so that's in millimeters again. And you can keep taking measurements. You might have to click on the measuring tool again, and then you click from one end to the other. Again, the measurement pops up down here. And you continue. So this is for the first exercise where we're measuring the length of the fingerprints. And you click on it again. Try and figure out where, maybe do the easy one first. And then this one down here, you can see it's a bit difficult to figure out where exactly the fingerprint starts and ends. So make sure you take a screenshot at this point once you're happy with the measurements you've taken. You can kind of zoom in and out as you'd like, but the orange lines will disappear as soon as you double click on the measuring tool there. The measurements will still stay down here, but the visual representation of where you clicked will disappear. Hopefully you've taken a screenshot of that. In the try it yourself box, it kind of walks you through taking those measurements, but also think about which fingers those fingerprints might belong to. Is there a thumb there? Or how do those measurements relate to the length of your own fingers or fingerprints? So do you think it was all from the same potter? Do you think they could have all been made at the same time with one hand in the same event, as we call it? So obviously a potter might touch a pot multiple times during different parts of the process. So it could be that this is a palimpsest of multiple instances where the same person has touched the pot. Is there any evidence for that? And then try measuring the distance between the fingerprints you see. This might help with that interpretation. Could you manage to get your own hand to fit that sort of rough shape with those measurements? Does that influence your interpretation at all? And then, are there any fingerprints that absolutely could not belong to the same fingerprinting event? And then just reflect on your interpretation, um, and kind of think about what stage of the manufacturing process it might represent, and what evidence leads you to think that it belongs to that manufacturing process. And then write a short caption explaining your reasoning to accompany your screenshot from this step in your gallery. So this is all we're going to do with MeshLab. It's a really powerful tool. We've only scratched the surface of how it can be used to work with 3D data, but the vast majority of its functions aren't necessarily intuitive. So there are lots of tutorials available online, the most popular of which is Mr. P MeshLab tutorials. So we've got a link in the handout to his channel. But that's it for exercise 2, and see you for exercise 3.